The committee will come to order. The National Archives and Records Administration, often shortened to the National Archives, is responsible for adequately maintaining and preserving presidential and federal records. These records are not just essential to keeping an accurate account of government activities or holding the executive branch accountable. They are critical to ensuring that our nation's history is fully and accurately preserved for future generations. The National Archives preserves some of our nation's most fundamental documents, like the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, as well as letters, photographs, newspapers, and congressional papers that tell the story of the United States from its earliest days until today. The National Archives also protects and provides access to critical records and documents for the public to use, from historical documents to educational resources, and most importantly, for veterans and for service members who need military personnel records to access the benefits that they have earned and deserve through their services. Preserving all of these important records is a significant undertaking, and it requires qualified, independent, nonpartisan leadership that is committed to serving in the best interest of the American people. Dr. Shogun, if confirmed, you will not only oversee the National Archives' responsibility to preserve these essential documents, you will also face several challenges, including antiquated resources and technology, the rapid proliferation of electronic records, extensive backlogs from veterans' requests, and the need to ensure that all records from every president and federal agency are completely and adequately preserved. And I'm confident that Congress can take the necessary steps to help address these challenges, modernize the government's record-keeping processes, and restore transparency and access for all Americans. As chairman of this committee, I'm working to build support for legislation that I'm drafting that will strengthen existing laws, update regulations, and modernize record-keeping processes to incorporate emerging technologies. We held a hearing on this issue earlier this year as well, and I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to build on these efforts to protect the public record. Dr. Shogun, I'm pleased to welcome you here today to discuss your nomination to serve in this very important role and how we can better work together to achieve these vital goals. Not only are you extremely well qualified for this position, in our meetings about your nomination, you have demonstrated keen judgment, nonpartisan independence, and the necessary capabilities to succeed in this challenging role. Your nomination is also historic, and once confirmed, you will be the first woman to serve as the Archivist of the United States. Congratulations on your nomination, and I look forward to hearing more from you today. Today, we are also considering 4 nominees to serve as judges for the District of Columbia Court of Appeals and D.C. Superior Court. These nominees are Vijay Shankar to be the Associate Judge on the D.C. Court of Appeals, and Laura Crane, Leslie Meek, and Veronica Sanchez to be Associate Judges on the D.C. Superior Court. I'm pleased to have these highly qualified nominees before us here today, each with a long-standing commitment to public service. The D.C. Superior Court and D.C. Court of Appeals function as the state-level trial and appellate courts within the unique justice system here in the nation's capital. Both courts are responsible for large volumes of cases each year, and the National Center for State Courts reports the D.C. Superior Court files approximately 83,000 new cases across its 5 divisions each year, one of the highest per capita rates in the entire country. Despite this enormous caseload, both courts are suffering from extensive judicial vacancies, which have delayed resources for parties before the court and has increased the workload for judges. If confirmed, you will not only take on these caseloads, but determine matters that impact the freedom, livelihoods, and families of many people who will come before you. Today's hearing is an important opportunity for this committee to learn more about your qualifications and how you plan to serve. So welcome to each of you, as well as your family members who are joining you here today, and thank you for your willingness to serve. We look forward to hearing from all of you today. Our acting ranking member, James Langford, you are now recognized for your opening comments.
Chairman Peters, thank you very much. Thanks for holding this hearing. You all have extensive backgrounds, an extensive amount of experience. This is not a fun process to be able to go through for anyone and for your families. So thanks for stepping up to be able to engage, agree or disagree on this. It's a difficult process for any American to go through, and it is very real public service. So thanks for your engagement at this point and in the questions you've already answered in the process that you've already walked through on this. Traditionally, in nominations hearings for an archivist positions and D.C. judicial nominations is quite frankly a pretty sleepy hearing as we walk through all the different issues and just a basic process because they've gone through. Obviously, there are some new issues that have arisen of late on this. The position of the archivist, and by the way, Dr. Shogun and I have had this conversation as recently as yesterday on the proper pronunciation of is archivist or archivist. And since she prefers the term archivist and she's being nominated for the position, we'll stick with her pronunciation of it as well. But the position of the archivist typically is one that's a nonpartisan position that there's not a lot of attention to. But there are two new issues that are fairly recent that have drawn a lot of attention to the National Archives on this, and I want to be able to mention both those. The federal courts and the Office of Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice have both been very, very clear on the Equal Rights Amendment. That amendment went through the process constitutionally and had an expiration on that. But for whatever reason, there are some activists that have risen up and declared that the archivist can just unilaterally declare that part of the Constitution. The former archivist stated that the National Archives refers to the Department of Justice on this issue will abide by the Office of Legal Counsel opinion unless otherwise directed by a final court order. Over this past year, that has still put the National Archives at the center of that controversy on that. And so today is the day we need to be able to clarify as well where the National Archives will continue to be able to move forward with the statutes and the law and how the constitutional process works. There's also obviously been an issue on the return of presidential records, which escalated to the point that the personal residence of former President Donald Trump was searched by the FBI, an absolutely unprecedented step. That was an initial request from the National Archives for records. Then a search was carried out by the FBI. There's been a lot of questions about how that happened, what were the requests, what requests were accepted or denied. This is something that Senator Scott and I have both written a letter to the chairman to try to get some sort of briefing on this. There was a briefing that then happened on what happened since the Mar-a-Lago raid, but there still hasn't been information from the National Archives on what has actually occurred, what led to that moment. It is a very unprecedented moment. Obviously, the current nominee was not the archivist at that point and can't answer the questions from before, but there'll still be a lot of questions about transparency and what occurs. For an agency and an entity that is responsible for holding records and making those records publicly available, one of the questions we'll have is what was the process leading up to this search? And are those records going to be publicly available like every other record is publicly available through the National Archives? Turning to the District of Columbia, thank you again for engaging in this. All of you have extensive background in the law and look forward to the questions and the issues on this. You're walking into a time where we absolutely need additional judges in the District of Columbia, and we need folks that are going to just simply follow the law on this. There's also an ongoing conversation that the chairman and I have had on this as well, working with the mayor of D.C., because months ago, 5 preborn children their remains were taken in by D.C. Police, Metropolitan Police. They were recovered. They were very late term, and they were identified to be connected to a Washington surgery clinic. In the District of Columbia, partial birth abortions are illegal, like they are everywhere else in the country. These children had every appearance of being victims of a partial birth abortion, and so we've had some very careful questions of the District of Columbia saying, how are you investigating this? What's the process when you discover this kind of action is actually taking place in the District of Columbia? We've engaged with the mayor to try to get answers to how the questions on this and what they're actually doing to be able to follow through, but instead the mayor's office has simply responded that they're going after the whistleblower in this case, and that they're turning the whistleblower in instead of actually investigating the death of these children. And so we're asking some very straightforward questions, and we'll continue to be able to ask those straightforward questions. And we plan to be able to get answers from the mayor's office. What is the plan in the days ahead when you discover the possibility that there is a crime being committed in the District of Columbia? Obviously, all of you will one day be hearing cases that will be very difficult, emotional cases like that in the days ahead. And so I'm going to continue to be able to press this issue and continue to be able to press the mayor's office to be able to be engaged. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to be able to work on our nominees and the process there to be able to get through, assuming that the mayor is going to be responsive at some point, and continue to use the only leverage that I have in the meantime to be able to have a responsive nature. In the District of Columbia, the law has to be enforced as it does everywhere else in the country. We just want consistency and enforcement of the law. And I think that's a fairly reasonable request to be able to work through, and we'll continue to be able to have that dialogue. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. These are important people to be able to engage with, and I look forward to the dialogue and answering questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Langford. It's the practice of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. So we will have a introduction for Dr. Shogun, but we're waiting for one of our colleagues to show up here. She's in a hearing right now. So I will start with our DC judges. Our first nominee is Vijay Shankar, Deputy Chief of the Appellate Section of the Criminal Division at the United States Department of Justice and Senior Litigation Counsel Detail in the Criminal Division's Fraud Section. In his role, he investigates and prosecutes violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and advises attorneys and leadership on a range of legal issues and litigation matters. Previously, Mr. Shankar served in the Office of Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, first as Senior Counsel and then as Acting Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Assistant Attorney General. Mr. Shankar has been awarded the Attorney General's John Marshall Award, the Assistant Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Service, and the Assistant Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service. Mr. Shankar, welcome to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. I'm honored and humbled to appear before you today as you consider my nomination to be an Associate Judge of the District of Columbia Court of Appeals. I thank you and your tireless staff for holding this hearing. Thank you to the Judicial Nomination Commission and its chair, Judge Emmett Sullivan, for recommending me to the White House. I thank President Joseph Biden for nominating me. I was extremely grateful when I was first nominated in 2020, and I'm honored to have been nominated again this year. And of course, I am grateful to Chief Judge Blackburn Rigsby and the Associate Judges of the DC Court of Appeals. I would be honored to join them in their service to the people of the district. I can go no further without recognizing my true partner in life, Dee Martin. Dee has been such a support to me throughout this process and also happens to be a phenomenal attorney in her own right. For over 20 years, Dee and I have supported each other in all of our endeavors, perhaps none of which is more important than the raising of our amazing daughter, who has made us proud every day of her 14 years. Thank you to my wonderful parents, who unfortunately could not travel to be here today. They came to this country with little money and no support, settled in Ohio, and worked tirelessly with the single goal of providing my sisters and me with every opportunity they could. Thank you also to my sisters, brother-in-law, and niece, and to my wife's family, who welcomed me into their lives the very first day I met them. There is not enough time today to thank all the people who have supported me in my professional life, but I must name two: the Honorable Chester J. Straub, for whom I had the privilege to serve as a law clerk, and Patty Merkamp Stemler, my boss for most of the past 17 years, who is here today. They both truly epitomize public service. For almost 2 decades, it has been my privilege to serve the nation as a career attorney in the Department of Justice. In that time, I have gained a deep understanding of appellate law and practice, having argued almost 60 cases and having appeared in every federal court of appeals with criminal jurisdiction. I have been trusted with some of the department's most challenging cases across subject matter areas and have been honored with the department's John Marshall Award for the handling of appeals. Before joining the department, I had a broad-based litigation practice at 2 national law firms where I gained valuable experience in civil, administrative, antitrust, and criminal law. As I mentioned, I also had the great fortune to begin my legal career as a law clerk to Judge Chester Straub on the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, where I learned about the value of preparation, meticulousness, civility, and collegiality. Public service is a passion to me, and if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed, I commit to ensuring that every party appearing before me is heard, respected, and given the opportunity to meaningfully participate in the judicial process, to applying the law impartially, and to striving every day to earn the respect of my colleagues and my community. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schenker. Our next nominee is Laura Crane. Ms. Crane has served as the Assistant United States Attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia since 2014 and is a Deputy Chief in the Violent Crimes and Narcotics Trafficking Section. Ms. Crane supervises handling the investigation and prosecution of complex federal cases targeting violence and narcotics trafficking in the district. She also prosecuted violent criminal matters in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. Prior to joining the U.S. Attorney's Office, Ms. Crane served as the Senior Associate and Litigation Associate in private practice, where she received an award in recognition for her outstanding pro bono service from the Legal Aid Society. Ms. Crane, welcome to our committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it is an honor and privilege to be here today. I am grateful for the opportunity to appear before you as you consider my nomination for Associate Judge of the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. There are many people I would like to thank today. First, I extend my thanks to each of the members of the committee and to the committee staff for considering my application. I further extend my appreciation to the Judicial Nomination Commission and its chair, Emmett G. Sullivan, for their service on the commission. I extend my humble thank you to President Biden for nominating me to serve the people of the District of Columbia in this capacity. I struggle to find words to express my deep appreciation for the support of my colleagues, family, and friends, many of whom are here today, who have been supporting me throughout this journey. In particular, I want to thank the current and former leadership of the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, where I've had the privilege of working for the past 8 years. This includes the current U.S. Attorney Matt Graves, as well as former U.S. Attorneys Ron Machin, Vince Cohen, Channing Phillips, and Jesse Liu. I also thank my colleagues from the U.S. Attorney's Office who I've learned so much from. I reserve special thanks for my friends and family who have supported me throughout this process and in the many years leading up to this. My parents, Pat and Carol, are here today. They traveled here from upstate New York to extend their unfaltering support that they've provided throughout my life. Without that support, I have no doubt I would not be sitting here before you today. My parents worked tirelessly to support their children and have served as an example of hard work, kindness, respect, and humility. My brother, Andrew Crane, and my sister-in-law, Yara, are also here today, both of whom have dedicated their careers to public service as an attorney and as an educator. I moved to the District of Columbia after graduating from Washington University School of Law in St. Louis. I had an opportunity to begin my legal career alongside the dedicated and accomplished public servants at the Department of Justice, where I worked on cases seeking to ensure that individuals with disabilities were receiving services in integrated settings. After briefly moving to New York City to work in private practice, I returned to the district for a clerkship with Judge James E. Boasberg of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. During my clerkship, I spent countless hours observing court proceedings and hoped that one day I would have an opportunity to practice like the advocates who appeared before Judge Boasberg. That dream became a reality when I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I've had the privilege of serving the citizens of the District of Columbia in both Superior Court and District Court for the past 8 years, trying 60 cases and working on over 100 investigations. Since joining the U.S. Attorney's Office, I've appeared in court on a daily or near-daily basis and observed firsthand the qualities that make for an exceptional judge: humility, hard work, and the application of the law to the facts without favor or bias. If given the opportunity to serve on the bench, I will honor these principles. Thank you again for considering my nomination, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Crane. We'll take a break from hearing from our wonderful nominees for the court to hear from our colleague, Shelley Capito from West Virginia. Senator Capito, you may introduce one of our nominees.
Yes, this is a real pleasure for me, and I want to thank the chairman and ranking member Langford for allowing me to be here to talk about somebody I have great admiration for. The National Archives is a treasured institution because it houses so many of our nation's treasures. The archives and the men and women there are the caretakers not just of the objects and the documents, but of the ideas and the inspirations that emanate from them. The mission of the archives is not just to preserve our history, but to educate and inform our future. So I'm here today to introduce to you a friend of mine, Dr. Colleen Shogan. She's the nominee to be the Archivist of the United States, and I believe her to be a person who will honor that past, who while leading the institution into the future. I've known Colleen in a personal and professional way for several years, and I'm here to speak of her qualifications and background to fulfill the role to which she has been nominated. She has a long career of public service, working in the Senate, at the Congressional Research Service, at the Library of Congress, and now the White House Historical Society. In addition to her professional experience, she is a published author. I would recommend her books. She's a mystery murder author, very, very good and very exciting to read because they're all on Capitol Hill. But to me, her most notable accomplishment is that she's married to a West Virginian and a very good friend of mine, Rob Rafferty. And that's actually how I got to meet Colleen. I've worked closely with Dr. Shogan a few years ago on an issue that is close to so many people's hearts here in Congress, and that's making reports written by the Congressional Research Service public to the American people. So transparency is something she's very dedicated to. The procedural and technological challenges of pulling this off were greater than folks really imagined, and it was the right thing to do, and now these reports that are paid for by the taxpayers are available to the taxpayers thanks to her hard work. She has the knowledge, experience, energy, and depth of dedication to serve in this role. I believe she would serve it very well, and I am very happy today to introduce her to this committee. And I didn't see the ranking member down there, Senator Portman. We've talked about this, and I certainly am planning to vote for her when I get the chance, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to have her here before you today. Congratulations.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you, Senator Capito. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for a wonderful introduction.
Now I have to leave.
And, well, we were glad we were able to have you come by
Thank
and
you,
make the
Howard.
introduction. Have a wonderful day. Dr. Shogan, you may proceed. Thank you for being here, and you may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Dr. Colleen Shogan, and my nomination to serve as the 11th Archivist of the United States is indeed the honor of a lifetime. I am likewise humbled by the opportunity to serve as the first woman nominated in the role. Before I continue, I would like to thank my husband, Rob, for being here today. He has consistently supported my career, and I know this will continue if I am confirmed as the Archivist. My family, including my 89-year-old father, watching today from Western Pennsylvania, and my brother, watching from Texas, has been instrumental in my success. I must admit this committee room is quite familiar to me. Over 15 years ago, I attended meetings here as a congressional staffer. I never imagined that I would be sitting on this side of the dais for a confirmation hearing. My passion for the American story started in the public high school I attended outside Pittsburgh, with engaging teachers who taught United States history and government. As a first-generation college student in my family, I was fortunate enough to receive a first-class education, which allowed me to explore the development and evolution of American ideas and institutions. My reverence for democratic principles, ideals, and governance led me to a career that included positions in academia, federal government service, and nonprofit management. Following my service in the Senate, I spent over a decade directly supporting Congress as a senior leader at the Congressional Research Service and the Library of Congress. I also served as the vice chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, which commemorated the anniversary of the 19th Amendment without partisanship. These positions, including the one I hold today at the White House Historical Association, have instilled in me the tremendous value of nonpartisanship and access to trusted sources. I am confident that my years of experience in these unique roles have prepared me well to serve as the Archivist of the United States. The National Archives and Records Administration, often known as NARA, preserves the building blocks of our nation's democracy. NARA does this by enabling access to the government records which tell our national story in the words and images of the people who made history. This is critical for several reasons. First, it provides citizens with answers about family heritage, military service, and governmental decisions. Citizen engagement with the archives materials online and in person through our nationwide system of archival research rooms and presidential libraries is a top priority for NARA. The National Archives also provides researchers, historians, genealogists, educators, students, and other stakeholders with trusted information about our shared past. In my own research, I have benefited from examining NARA's records. As a political scientist, I strongly believe that we cannot understand our nation's present condition without a comprehensive understanding of the past that brought us here. Along with our other federal cultural institutions, NARA secures the repository of knowledge that enables such understanding for scholars and citizens alike. Additionally, the National Archives provides vital records management services and guidance to all three branches of government and is leading the government-wide transition to electronic record keeping. Most importantly, NARA safeguards government records in public trust to enable citizens, such as veterans, to claim their rights to hold their government accountable and to participate in the civic process. If confirmed, I will have many hills to climb in this position. I do not assume these challenges lightly. To succeed, we will need to find creative ways to become more efficient, to capitalize upon public-private partnerships, and to engage previously underserved communities in meaningful ways. Of course, NARA must do this as technologies improve at a lightning speed. Government is not always considered nimble when it comes to innovation, but the National Archives can serve as a leader in its transition to its primarily digital future. This will require investing in the archive's talented workforce and making smart business decisions that will propel NARA forward. In a private meditation, Abraham Lincoln likened the principles of the Declaration of Independence to the apple of gold, a phrase contained in the book of Proverbs. Lincoln knew it was his task to move the nation towards a more perfect realization of these principles. As the 250th anniversary of our country approaches, this hard work continues. If confirmed, I look forward to sharing the treasured collection of the National Archives with all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. Our next nominee is Leslie Meek. Ms. Meek received her appointment as an administrative law judge with the District of Columbia Office of Administrative Hearings in June of 2014. Ms. Meek presides over cases involving rental housing, unemployment compensation, tax and revenue, D.C. Public Schools, the D.C. Taxi Cab Commission, and the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. Before joining the Office of Administrative Hearings, Ms. Meek served as an administrative law judge, an appellate administrative law judge with the District of Columbia Department of Employment Services Administrative Hearings Division. There, she adjudicated workers' compensation cases for over 8 years. Ms. Meek, so welcome to our committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. Thank you for your time and consideration of my nomination to serve as Associate Judge on the District of Columbia Superior Court. I am honored to be here. I am also honored by President Joseph Biden's nomination of me for the District of Columbia Superior Court, and I thank him for it. I am thankful to the members of the District of Columbia Judicial Nominations Commission and its chair, Judge Emmett Sullivan, for recommending me to the White House. I am thankful for the support of my family and friends and all of the love they share with me as I journey towards this endeavor. I am the proud mother of 2 wonderful adults, Lauren Meek, a burgeoning artist in New York City, and Kendrick Meek Jr., a third-year law student at the University of Miami. Throughout this process, they have been tremendous motivators with kind and generous encouragement. I could not have asked for better children or cheerleaders. I am a first-generation American, born to parents who immigrated to the United States from Jamaica. It was their intention to come to this country and live the American dream, and I am the personification of those dreams. My mother, Lois Eccleston Capp, always gave me the space to aim high and the support to accomplish my goals. She is my heart, and I thank her for her enduring support, her prayers, and her faith in me. I am thankful to my late grandmother, Lucille Butler James, who didn't have the privilege of attending college herself, but seemingly every day of my young life impressed upon me the importance of an education. I am thankful to my late father, Harold Dixon, who taught me by example how determination, focus, and industry can overcome obstacles. I thank my late mother-in-law, former Congresswoman Carrie Meek, for all that she taught me, her friendship and her love. Carrie frequently shared her philosophy: to be a true public servant, you have to love people. Recalling this mantra reminds me that I am right on track. I thank my dear friend Oscar Wright, who has stood by me and supported me through this process. I am currently an administrative law judge with the District of Columbia government. During the last 16 years, I have successfully served the district as both an administrative law judge and administrative appeals judge. In that time, I have adjudicated over 7,000 cases concerning a number of entities, including the Department of Employment Services, Department of Health, Department of Public Works, Department of Energy and Environment, Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, Office of Tax and Revenue, and the Department of Transportation. My 16 years of adjudicatory experience has taught me the importance of maintaining a respectful and courteous judicial temperament, and should I be fortunate enough to be confirmed, I remain committed to humbly serving the district's residents with unbiased, sound, and efficient judicial review of the cases that come before me. My legal career began when I was hired out of law school to serve as a prosecutor for the Miami-Dade State's Attorney's Office. During that time, I prosecuted criminal cases in the county court. I then served as general counsel to the United Teachers of Dade and served as a prosecuting attorney for the City of Miami and the State of Florida Comptroller's Office. In these positions, I litigated civil and labor and employment law cases before administrative courts. These experiences honed my litigation skills and prepared me well for my position as a judge. My professional experiences have given me a solid understanding of the role of adjudicator and the importance of ensuring that justice is applied fairly and impartially. I am eager to use my skills to serve the District of Columbia as a Superior Court Associate Judge, and I stand ready to answer any of your questions as you consider entrusting me with this very important position. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meek. Today's final nominee is Veronica Sanchez. Ms. Sanchez is a senior assistant United States attorney who has served for the past 11 years at the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. Currently, she is the chief of the Major Crimes Section in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. In her role, she oversees attorneys responsible for investigating and prosecuting felony violent crimes in the Superior Court, including economic crimes. Before serving as chief of the Major Crimes Section, Ms. Sanchez investigated and prosecuted cases ranging from simple assault to homicides in the Superior Court. She also served as a senior assistant United States attorney in the fraud section, focused on handling financial fraud matters in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Ms. Sanchez, welcome to our committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Good morning. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee. It is an honor and a privilege to appear before you as a nominee to be an associate judge for the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. I extend my thanks to each of you and your dedicated committee staff for all of the hard work that has gone into considering my nomination. I would also like to thank the District of Columbia Judicial Nomination Commission and its chair, the Honorable Emmett Sullivan, for recommending me to the White House, and I am thankful to President Joseph Biden for nominating me to this position. I must also thank the current U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, and former U.S. Attorneys Channing Phillips, Jesse Liu, Ronald Machen, and Vincent Cohen for their support and guidance throughout my career as a prosecutor. I also thank my current and former colleagues from the United States Attorney's Office. It is an honor to work with all of you. I reserve special thanks for the people in my life who are here because they love and support me in my home, my work, and my community. My husband is here today. He's my best friend, my partner in life, and my biggest advocate. Thank you for your encouragement and support of all my personal and professional endeavors. I want to take a moment to thank my 2 children for their patience and support during the times when they have had to share their time with me due to the demands of my job. I love you both. My father is here today, while my mother and my brother watch and support me from South Florida and Texas. I was born in Nicaragua and was fortunate to come to the United States a few months before my 8th birthday. My parents came to this country seeking a better future for their children. I would not be here today without the many sacrifices made by my parents, who taught me through their words and their actions the values of hard work, integrity, fairness, and service. I also want to thank the rest of my family and friends from all over their country for their support and prayers throughout this process. I have dedicated my career to public service, hoping to give back to the country that has afforded me and so many others the opportunity to turn dreams into reality. I began my legal career by clerking for the Honorable Edward C. Reed of the United States District Court for the District of Nevada. I also had the honor of clerking for the Honorable Melvin Brunetti for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. I moved to the District of Columbia in 2002 after joining the Department of Justice Honors Program with the Antitrust Division. I spent 6 years as a trial attorney in the Antitrust Division, handling civil antitrust matters prior to joining the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. Since 2009, I have served as an assistant United States attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, where I have handled a wide range of criminal cases on behalf of the United States. I have handled over 20 trials in the Superior Court and have investigated and prosecuted misdemeanors, felonies, homicides, and fraud matters. Throughout my legal career, I have sought to uphold the law and the values of fairness and justice. If I am confirmed, it will be both an honor and a privilege to continue to serve the residents of the District of Columbia as an associate judge on the Superior Court. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. There are 3 questions that the committee asks of every nominee, and I'm going to ask each of you to respond briefly with just a yes or no. Dr. Shogun, we'll start with you, and then we'll work down the table for each of these questions. First, is there anything you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you have been nominated?
No.
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 Second, do you know of anything personal or otherwise that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you have been nominated?
No.
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 And lastly, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes.
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 Great. Well, thank you. Dr. Shogun, you have a big job ahead of you, and I think it's important for the committee to hear from you. How do you view the role of NARA in ensuring compliance with the records laws and the several records laws that we have across federal government?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. The National Archives leads the federal government in the records retention, policies, and procedures, and in particular relies upon federal agencies that supply those records to provide the National Archives with paper records at this point in time, and in the future, digital records, so that the repository of our nation's story can be complete.
So as archivist, what specifically do you plan to do to improve the federal records preservation process that we currently have?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I think that the major challenge for the National Archives going forward will be the transition from a primarily analog or paper repository to a primarily digital repository. And when that does happen, when the records start to come from federal agencies in that digital format and not the analog format, there's going to have to be a lot of work and communication with federal agencies so that those records come to the National Archives in the right format and with the right information and descriptive data so that the records can be useful and available to the American people.
Clearly a big undertaking and to make those kinds of changes, plus to go back and digitize an awful lot of records that have already been placed there in a paper format. Do you believe that NARA has the resources it needs to meet this challenge? And specifically, what sort of technological needs do you anticipate requesting in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I think the resources at the National Archives can be a challenge. Of course, all federal agencies have to work efficiently and effectively. Given the big tasks that are ahead for the National Archives, if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I plan to support a set of very common sense proposals that will enable the National Archives to transition into its digital future. As I understand it, right now, Mr. Chairman, there is the development of a new technology system that will enable the receipt of all digital records. That's both born digital records and records that have been digitized. And that technology system, I can say, is being built in an iterative way called Agile Development. And I was very happy when I heard that, because that means that it can be built in a step-by-step process. And of course, if I'm confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I look forward to working with the development of that IT system so it can be really the guidepost for NARA's future.
As I mentioned in my opening comments, veterans' record requests are high. There's a huge backlog, and we certainly owe the men and women who have served us with honor and distinction the ability to get those records in a timely way to access benefits that they've earned and other needs for those records. So as Archivist, how do you plan to work to reduce this considerable backlog? And tell the committee how you view this as a priority if confirmed.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I view this as the most important discrete problem facing me if I'm confirmed as Archivist of the United States. The backlog has been reduced considerably, down from 600,000 requests down to about 440,000 requests. This issue is very personal for me. I have many veterans in my family, so I understand its importance. I also know that the staff at the NPRC in St. Louis has been working tirelessly since March to reduce this backlog. So if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, it will be my priority after confirmation to make a trip to St. Louis. It would be my first trip as Archivist of the United States. I want to get there on the ground, meet the leadership, of course, of the NPRC, meet the talented staff of the NPRC, and come up with a sensible plan of how we can reduce this backlog at a faster pace.
Right, right. Dr. Shogun, do you believe that NARA has a role in promoting government transparency and public access of records?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do.
So what will you do as an archivist to improve public access?
Thank you for that question. I think that transparency and access is really intertwined with digital. You can access the records at the National Archives in a number of ways. First, you can come and visit the National Archives here in Washington, D.C. to view our founding documents and see some of the records in person. If you're a researcher, you can visit one of the over 30 archival research rooms all across the United States and engage the records in a very meaningful way. But most Americans are probably going to interact with the records of the National Archives through digital means, online, through the Archives catalog. And so that's why the digital future is extraordinarily important for the National Archives. Right now, there's about 200 million digitized copies of records in the catalog, which makes it the largest digital archive in the world. And as I understand it, the Archives is planning to go to 500 million digital copies by 2026. And if I'm confirmed, I'm going to make sure we hit that mark and hopefully exceed it.
Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Shogan, for your responses. Ranking Member Portman, you are recognized for your questions. He has deferred. Our acting ranking member has deferred to the ranking members, because we understand you're on a tight schedule. So Senator Langford is being very gracious.
Well, first I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Langford, for agreeing to be ranking today. It's been my practice, because Senator Langford is the chair of the subcommittee on D.C., that I defer to him with regard to these D.C. judge confirmation hearings. I do think these roles need to be filled. And I thank the 4 distinguished lawyers who are before us this morning who have stepped forward to fill those roles. I normally ask questions about the criminal justice system in D.C. because the crime wave is a huge concern of all of ours. And I will not have time to get into that today, but just assume that all 4 of you agree that part of your role is to assure that cases are brought and handled and backlogs are dealt with so that we can have a safer D.C. community. Dr. Shogan, I want to give you a chance to explain some of your previous statements and some of your record. The law, as you know, requires the archivist to be appointed without regard to political affiliation. In 2007, you wrote an article entitled "Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, a Republican Populism," which focuses on Presidents Eisenhower, Reagan, and George W. Bush. In it, you state that, quote, "Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities, and Democrats coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum." Would you please explain your views on this and what you meant by that?
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. As you stated, that article was written 16, 17 years ago. It was an academic article. And in that article, I was trying to explain how certain presidents very effectively, through their rhetoric, were able to communicate with everyday Americans.
Again, you're being nominated as the nonpartisan National Archivist. Among other roles, the National Archives and Records Administration administers the presidential library system for Republicans and Democrats alike. Given that you have written about some of these Republican presidents in a negative way, for example, saying that Ronald Reagan had, quote, "less than impressive intellectual capabilities," end quote, and that, quote, "it was widely accepted that George W. Bush was less intelligent than his challenger, Al Gore," end quote, how can we be assured that you will serve effectively in this nonpartisan role?
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. I stand strongly on my 15 years of nonpartisan government service at the Congressional Research Service, at the Library of Congress, and at the White House Historical Association, which I joined in 2019 when President Trump was President of the United States, worked very effectively with President Trump's White House as he served as President of the United States and continued to do so under President Biden's administration. Also, at the White House Historical Association, we have members of the board who are representatives from both Republican and Democratic administrations, and I work very effectively with that board of directors.
With regard to January 6th, in response to a tweet from a political science professor which stated political science said this would happen, we are not smug about it. Either you tweeted back and I quote, "I wrote about it in 2007. I do believe what I observed was the precursor." And you included a link to the Republican anti-intellectualism article that we talked about a moment ago. I just want to give you a chance to explain this. It would appear to me that you're saying that because you believe Republican presidents like George W. Bush, for whom I worked, as you know, tended to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities, and/or because you believe he was less intelligent than his opponent, Al Gore, that these are the precursor somehow to the events of January 6th, which, of course, George W. Bush condemned in the strongest terms possible.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman, for that question. In no way, shape, or possible do I think that President Bush is inferior intellectually or less intelligent. That was not the purpose of the article. It's not stated in the article. And I was very clear that he was well-suited for the presidency, and that is stated in the article.
Okay. So the quote that I have, that it says it was widely accepted that Bush was less intelligent than his challenger, Al Gore, was not your quote.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, Ranking Member Portman. That was a characterization, but once again, I want to say that I stand by my statement that this was an article about President Bush and his rhetorical abilities to be able to communicate common sense principles to everyday Americans.
Okay. You do have a lot of tweets about President Trump. You mentioned that you served under him essentially when you were at the Historical Society. Here's one on January 5th, 2020, which says, "Isn't the next move a self-pardon?" Self-pardon would imply criminality. If confirmed, you would have to work with the former president's staff, and how can you be confident that you'd be able to work effectively with former President Trump's staff?
Yes. Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Portman. I am confident that I would be able to work with President Trump and his staff. I have worked with him in the past, as you noted, at the White House Historical Association, also in my capacity as the Vice Chair of the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, which was entirely conducted during the Trump presidency. And we worked very effectively with President Trump, Mrs. Trump, and the White House during that celebration to, I think, really benefit the American people.
Dr. Shogan, there's a January 2020 memo from the Trump Justice Department, OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, which concluded that the Equal Rights Amendment's adoption could not be certified because not enough states had ratified the amendment prior to the relevant deadline set by Congress. Shortly thereafter, the National Archives press release stated that the archivist defers to the OLC on this issue and would abide by the opinion unless otherwise directed by a final court order. A January 2022 OLC memo by the Biden Justice Department stated that Congress was entitled to take a different view on that, but did not modify the conclusion of the January 2020 memo. If confirmed, would you continue to abide by the January 2020 OLC opinion as your predecessor did?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, I would.
And as the National Archives press release stated, would a court ordering you to certify the amendment be the only circumstances under which you would certify the amendment?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think the only who will decide the fate of the ERA is the federal judiciary and/or Congress.
There are members of Congress and interest groups who believe the archivist has the authority to certify the Equal Rights Amendment. I'm sure you're well aware of that. How would you respond to their calls to certify the amendment?
Yes, thank you for that question. The archivist serves in the capacity, in a nonpartisan, apolitical capacity, and I vowed, if I am confirmed as archivist, to serve in that fashion.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Acting Ranking Member Senator Langford, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Just the fill-in guy today on this one as well. Ranking Member Portman, thank you for your leadership in the committee as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing. And again, thank you to all the witnesses today for the process. I do want to follow up what Ranking Member Portman was talking about on the Equal Rights Amendment. Dr. Shogan, during your process in your consideration as a nominee, did anyone from the Biden administration ask you about your stand on the ERA, what your position was on that in the approval process? And if so, what was that conversation?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I was not asked that question during the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your very clear statements, both to our staff in writing and to Senator Portman, that the issue with the ERA is settled by the federal courts or by Congress, not by the archivist, or the archivist, as you say on it, either way. So we want to make that very clear, because obviously there are members of Congress that have disagreement on that. The previous archivist disagreed and said, no, this is not the role of the archivist to unilaterally make that decision. You've obviously agreed with that publicly, and I appreciate your engagement on that. You and I have spoken before about a warning label that is currently on our founding documents, that is actually on every document that is digitized in the National Archives. In the consideration, it warns Americans or anyone reading our documents that there's potentially harmful content, that this content could be offensive to individuals, that whether it's the United States Constitution or whether it's autopsy photos from World War II, it doesn't matter, it's on everything, as that warning piece on that banner on it. My question to you in our conversation was, I don't want it to be misunderstood in any way, that the National Archives could consider the United States Constitution a potentially offensive document, which clearly it's a founding document, it's not offensive. There are bits of our history that all of us as Americans look back on and are embarrassed who we were as Americans and decisions that we have made. We don't always get it right over our history, but we are working to make a more perfect union. But all of our history is our history. The important thing to me is there's never a warning on a single document. And that we reconsider labeling some of our documents offensive when they're just our history on this. So as you and I have spoken about this before, my challenge is to be able to review that warning, to be able to determine what's the best way to be able to do it, what's appropriate to be able to get to parents, to say if your children are looking at all these things, there are photos that are gruesome photos from World War II, for instance, of the battlefield and the Civil War, that are painful to be able to view, especially as a child. But there's also important national documents that are here. How do you plan to be able to handle this offensive label and this warning?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. You are correct. When there is a search done in the archives, the online archives catalog, there is language that makes users aware that they may inadvertently come across content that could be difficult to view. As we talked about yesterday in your office, I am primarily concerned about, if I am confirmed as archivist, I want more teachers and students to use the National Archives. If you have to do a history project on World War II or World War I, we want you to come to the National Archives and use that catalog to find those primary sources. And as you know, kids are excellent searchers today. They're better searchers than we are. So when they look for those relevant documents, they could easily jump to something else inadvertently. And so that's why that language is there. But as we talked about yesterday, I am absolutely willing to come and talk to you about that language, and we can review it together and move forward.
Okay, thank you. As you and I both know, being around teenagers, all you have to do is put a warning that this could be offensive, and that makes them search it more, as you also know. So that's another issue we need to evaluate, and just evaluate what the effectiveness of this is, to have a warning label on it, if that's really accomplishing anything on it, other than just being a distraction. You and I also spoke about the raid that happened in Mar-a-Lago, former President Trump's private residence, and going through those documents. In an unusual situation, it wasn't just the FBI carrying out the raid, but it was the request of the National Archives to be able to engage with these records and then trigger something with the FBI. Typically, this would be a voluntary conversation. It's my understanding that you've had dialogue with our staff to say all of your preferences, any disagreements in this document, this should be a voluntary conversation rather than a legal conversation or a raid. A raid of a former president's house is unprecedented, and it puts the entire process on full display to be able to say, how does this happen? Why does this happen? Everyone gets questions on it. So my first of the question is, should this be a voluntary cooperation rather than a legal raid with a search warrant coming into a private residence?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. I want to be clear that as the nominee for this position, I have not been briefed on any of the details of what has happened, so I have no information about those decisions or the sequence of events. But as I understand it, when there is some concern about missing or damaged records in general at the National Archives, At that point in time, the records, to retrieve the records, there is a voluntary exchange of communication with those individuals. And as I understand it, once again, I don't have any past knowledge of this, the vast majority of the time the records are recovered and retrieved.
Right. This is unprecedented for a former president, obviously, to be able to go through this. The reason I ask you is because that has now set a new precedent that going forward, this is going to be the new standard for every president after this. And so this starts a very different process that we're trying to evaluate. The second part of my question on this is, this is the National Archives, the keeper of all records on this. Now the email chains, the conversations, any notes that were done for the National Archives in their communication with the FBI about this now become national historical records and are not only important to be able to maintain and to be able to protect, but also for the visibility of this committee as well. It's the reason that Senator Scott and I have both reached out to this committee to be able to say, we need to be able to talk about this because there was something entirely new that was just created by the National Archives and the FBI in searching a former president's house. Will you agree to, in the future, making records available at the National Archives to be able to show what the process was and the decision-making was to be able to reach to this point so they'll have greater transparency for the American people?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. Yes, I believe that transparency with this committee, I want to be responsive to requests if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States. Once again, I do want to state I don't know
Right.
where we are in this Department of Justice law enforcement process. But as a general statement, Senator, you have my commitment that I will work with you and members of this committee to be as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with you, Shogun, if I could. You have talked throughout today's hearing so far and in your pre-hearing Q&A about how much it's important to be a nonpartisan leader. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And so if you're confirmed, you will attempt to stay politically neutral in your decision-making. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator.
Fair characterization of your views, I should say.
Yes, yes.
So I was troubled, I have to say, by this article that you wrote that Senator Portman asked you about a minute ago, published by the American Political Science Association. I have it here, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism, published in June of 2007. Do you consider this piece to be nonpartisan?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I consider it to be an academic article, publication of 16, 17 years ago, a scholarly piece.
Yeah, let's dig into it a little bit. You write in your paper that to combat allegations of elitism, recent Republican presidents have adopted anti-intellectualism. How would you define anti-intellectualism?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. The ability to speak in very plain, common sense terms to Americans.
So you say recent Republican presidents, but your case studies are Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan, and then coming up, I think, to George W. Bush. So what's the point here? I mean, you say at one point Republicans tend to exhibit anti-intellectual qualities. Democrats, on the other hand, coalesce on the intellectual tail of the continuum. So is the point that Republicans are stupid and Democrats are intellectual?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. The point of the article is that the presidents that I featured in it have a rhetorical connection with the American people.
A rhetorical connection that you say is anti-intellectual, and you feature every two-term Republican president, going back to Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes, Senator, I think it's a piece on rhetoric, and it is really looking at how these presidents have been successful rhetorically in their arguments.
Interesting. It's a piece on rhetoric, but you attribute part of the anti-intellectualism of the Republican Party to, in your words, the rise of the religious right. Tell me about that. Is it because those voters are stupid?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Absolutely not. And if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I look forward to welcoming all Americans to the National Archives.
So do you think that people who voted for Donald Trump are anti-intellectual?
Thank you, Senator. I would not make any judgment on the people who voted for President Trump or any other president.
So you don't think the people who voted for Dwight Eisenhower or Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush, they weren't anti-intellectual? The anti-intellectual rhetoric just appealed to them because what? What's your theory?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. As I said, presidents are able to speak in common sense, plain terms to Americans that they understand.
So you characterize President Reagan as having, quote, less than impressive intellectual capacities. You said President Eisenhower and Bush were decidedly intellectual. You said Reagan engaged in intellectual posturing. Let's just start with the first one, less than impressive intellectual capacities. So in other words, it's dumb.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely not. That was a perception, and it was cited.
I'm sorry, it's a perception by whom? By you? You wrote about it.
No, Senator, that was, and as I said, in the article, that is a perception, but actually in the article, because...
You say Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. That's presented as a factual statement. You don't even cite for it. This is on page 298. I have your article. Don't dissemble in front of me. So Reagan's less than impressive intellectual capacities have been widely discussed. You're not saying that he had less than, that's not your view?
Thank you, Senator. It is not my view.
Why did you write it?
Thank you, Senator. That is not my view. My view was focused on his rhetorical capability.
That's not what your sentence says. Listen, you wrote an article saying basically that Republican voters are stupid, that Republican presidents deliberately appeal to anti-intellectualism. You rolled it all up in this thing called Republican populism, yet you're trying to present yourself here as a nonpartisan. In fact, you're an extreme partisan, and your record shows that. You're someone who has denigrated Republican presidents, every two-term Republican president, I hope I'm not leaving anybody out, that has, since the Second World War, and their voters in this lengthy article. I mean, I just don't understand. If you wrote it, why won't you stand behind it?
Thank you, Senator. I will stand by my long experience for over 15 years of nonpartisan service.
You know, this is not just a theoretical set of questions, because as you know, we have seen what happens when you have political activists in the position that you are up for confirmation for. And we are living through that as a nation right now. We are living through the weaponization, the political weaponization of the National Archives, the political weaponization of the Department of Justice, the political weaponization of the FBI, such that half of the people of this country cannot trust those institutions. We're living with a president who calls half the voters of this country semi-fascists, who have said that they are a threat to democracy. This is an elected American president who makes these outrageous, outrageous statements. So in that environment, frankly, to have you up for confirmation for this position, which has become very politically charged, in a way I lament. It should not have been, but unfortunately, the past archivists have done what they've done. The FBI has done what it has done. DOJ has done what they have done. And here you are talking about the anti-intellectualism and, frankly, stupidity of American voters. I mean, if that isn't playing to type, I don't know what the world is. I mean, it's basically a self-parody. How can you assure me or anybody watching this hearing, the millions of Americans, 75 million Americans who voted for a Republican in the last election, how can you assure them that you will be truly nonpartisan, given what you have said over a period of years?
Yes. Thank you, Senator. I stand by my record of nonpartisan service at the Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, and at the White House Historical Association. And I invite anybody to talk to the people that I have worked with for years in my nonpartisan government service.
Mr. Chairman, without objection, I'd like to enter this article, Anti-Intellectualism in the Modern Presidency, Republican Populism. I'd like to enter it into the record.
Without objection.
I'd invite everybody to read this. You can read the words for yourselves. You can read the entire article for yourselves, and folks can make up their own minds. I think when they do, they'll be really disappointed. I'm deeply disappointed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. Senator Ossoff, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I know you touched on this issue a moment ago. I want to raise it again with you, Dr. Shogan. That's the backlog in military service records. Veterans across Georgia, across the country, are deeply frustrated by the interminable delays accessing their military records. And they need these records for their VA health care benefits. They need these records for their employment and educational benefits. I introduced last week the Bipartisan Access for Veterans to Records Act to try to address this backlog so that veterans in Georgia and across the country can access their records. If confirmed, will you commit to working with me to eliminate the backlog of military service records requests at NPRC, and not just to working with me, but to putting it at the very top of your agenda?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that question. It is at the very top of my agenda if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States. And in fact, if I am confirmed as Archivist of the United States, I will make my first trip as Archivist of the United States to St. Louis, to the NPRC, so I can meet once again with the leadership there and the hardworking staff that are attempting to reduce the backlog. There has been great progress made thus far. And I look forward to finding creative solutions within federal law and regulations in order to reduce that backlog at a faster pace.
I appreciate that commitment, Dr. Shogan, and making that commitment here today will mean a lot to veterans in Georgia who frankly are skeptical after years of dealing with this that there can be a change. But there must be a change. Veterans deserve timely access to their records. And I'm going to ask for a further commitment, which is that once you have had the opportunity to meet again with the folks at the NPRC and to get your bearings in your first 4 or 5 weeks in office, should you be confirmed, that you will timely submit to this committee your assessment of the drivers of this backlog and a specific plan to eliminate it. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I am willing to make that commitment. I will make myself available, what I've learned. And just a further comment on that, I mean, obviously the first thing that has to be done if I'm confirmed as Archivist is removing the backlog. But there has to be a second step, which is to make sure that backlog is not created in future circumstances. We hope that the pandemic is over, but we can never predict what is coming down the road in the future. So I believe there has been great progress by the Department of Veterans Affairs in moving to digitize those records in a timely fashion and in a reasonable priority. And once those records are digitized and placed in the cloud, then NPRC staff will be able to access them, and I think the requests will be processed much faster in the future. So I think there's a good end to this story if we can get there.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. I understand there is also a backlog of immigration-related record requests known as A-files managed by NARA. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, Senator, I am in a briefing document. I'm not intimately familiar, but I am aware of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask as well that, and we can have our teams work together to define a specific deadline for this. But that should you be confirmed, similarly, once you've had the opportunity to assess in detail the nature of that challenge, that you'll submit to the committee a proposal for addressing that backlog. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I am willing to follow up and make that commitment.
I appreciate that. You, of course, are familiar with this from some of your past work, but you will have some cybersecurity challenges to manage should you be confirmed, particularly as more records are digitized. How are you thinking about handling the threats to cybersecurity that will present themselves at the National Archives?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I am aware that there has been an Inspector General, an IG report for the National Archives concerning cybersecurity, and I would plan to review that report and find out firsthand what is being done to address those issues or concerns in a timely fashion.
Okay, well, I know that the chairman and members of this committee are deeply concerned with cybersecurity for federal agencies, so please let us know what resources or authorities may be helpful should you be confirmed for that mission. Finally, I want to bring to your attention something that is of deep and particular concern to my constituents in Georgia and a particular concern across the American South. And that is the disposition of civil rights cold cases. The lynchings, the murders, the abductions that took place in the Jim Crow era and before in the state of Georgia and across the South for which there has never been justice. And the descendants of those who were murdered, who are still crying out for justice. I have introduced the Bipartisan Civil Rights Cold Case Records Review Board Support Act, and I'd like your commitment to work with my office, to work with that Cold Case Record Review Board to make every resource at NARA available to pursue the truth and to pursue justice for those who were lynched, for those who were abducted, for those who were assaulted in the state of Georgia, across the South, and across the country, and ensure that our quest for justice is not abandoned. Will you make that commitment?
Yes, Senator, I look forward to working with you and your staff on this issue, if I am confirmed.
Thank you, Dr. Shogan. It's really important, and I appreciate your testimony today. Appreciate the rest of the panel. Congratulations for the nominations, and I yield.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Well, this question is for all of our judicial candidates. I think we'll start at our nominees, I should say. We will start with Ms. Sanchez, and then we'll work down to Mr. Schenker. The D.C. courts handle a very, very high volume of cases, and vacancies on both the Superior Court and Court of Appeals have, without question, increased this backlog considerably. So my question for each of you is, if confirmed, how will you manage your caseload efficiently while also ensuring that everybody who comes before you has a meaningful opportunity to be heard? Ms. Sanchez, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question, Senator. As an assistant United States attorney, I have had a lot of experience handling large volume caseload. If I am confirmed as a judge, I would ensure that the parties know the expectations at each status hearing. I would ensure that I am prepared, and I would ensure that I am listening to everything that the parties are saying and reading what they file, and also ensure that I reach reasoned decisions with diligence.
Very good.
Thank you, Senator. I agree with my co-nominee. I would also like to add that having been an administrative law judge for the past 16 years, I have learned that efficiency is greatly important to adjudicating cases. It's important to make sure that all parties are aware of what's expected of them at the beginning of the hearing, and that they expect to be held to those expectations and requirements. And once we have those clear goals set, we're able to facilitate the case efficiently and effectively. Thank you.
I agree with both of my co-nominees, and I would add that as a judge, I would put in all of the necessary time and effort to make sure that I am ready and prepared in court each day so that my calendar is managed efficiently. I've had the privilege of working for a district court judge who managed his calendar in that way, and I think that with my experience, having practiced in Superior Court and my familiarity with the D.C. Code, I'd be able to quickly resolve matters that were presented in front of me.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. I'm acutely aware of the need to work through the backlog in the D.C. court system as well as move cases with dispatch without sacrificing due care and attention. I have a heavy caseload at the Department of Justice. I have always prioritized preparation and responsiveness and efficiency. I think if I were fortunate enough to be confirmed as a judge, I would work to be prepared, to apply strict standards for extensions, to circulate my draft opinions promptly, and to quickly look at my colleagues' draft opinions. Very
good. This next question will be for all of you as well, and I'll start with you, Ms. Meek, and then work down that way, and then end at Ms. Sanchez. In your view, what is the proper temperament of a judge? And you could think back through your career, how have you developed the elements that are going to be necessary to have the appropriate judicial temperament that you will need to exhibit if confirmed?
I believe that components of the proper temperament for a judge, patience, understanding, respect for the parties is very important, fairness. If all of these things are applied, then it makes for a very good process for the parties. It makes for good due process for the parties, and it makes it the job easier for the judge, actually. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Crane.
I agree with my co-nominee and would add that being open-minded is extremely important in giving both parties an opportunity to raise the issues before me and then evaluate those carefully by listening closely to the parties would be an important trait as well.
Thank you. I agree with my co-nominees as well. I generally consider respect, humility, collegiality, and impartiality as the hallmarks of a judicial temperament.
Ms. Sanchez?
Thank you. I concur as well. I would add that I think a dedication to the rule of law is also particularly necessary for a judge.
Next question, last question will be for Mr. Schenker, Ms. Crane, and Ms. Sanchez, the three of you. As you shift from the role of an advocate to the role of an impartial adjudicator, how are you preparing to make this transition if confirmed? Mr. Schenker.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. I'm acutely aware of the critical differences between an advocate and an impartial arbiter. If I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, I commit to addressing all of my cases and the parties before me with impartiality, without bias, without prejudgment, and putting in the work in terms of reading the briefs, reading the cases, and listening to the arguments fairly and impartially.
Ms. Crane.
As an assistant United States attorney for the past 8 years, I have often been required to anticipate the arguments of the opposing side, and I think that skill of constantly thinking about the flaws in my case as an advocate will prepare me well to be able to clearly see both sides and be prepared to listen fairly to both sides before me.
Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you. I agree with my fellow nominees. I think that as an assistant United States attorney, I have had the experience of also working with victims and working with witnesses, and so also recognize the importance, quality that a judge would have to ensure that individuals that come before are heard and listened to, and also I have also had the experience of having to assess cases and being able to step back and see whether the facts apply to the law.
Very good. Well, I would like to thank, once again, each of our nominees for joining us here today and for your willingness to serve in these very important positions that you have been nominated for. The nominees have filed responses to biographical and financial questionnaires, and without objection, this information will be made a part of the hearing record with the exception of the financial data, which is on file and available for public inspection in the committee offices. The hearing record will remain open until 12 p.m. tomorrow, September 22nd, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is now adjourned.